Hello, class. So today we're going to go ahead and talk about the Spanish period. I'm going to need you to take Cornell notes. Again, you have the two options. You can use the template or you can write it on notebook paper. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to cover three things today. The first one is going to be Francisco Vasquez de Cornado's expedition. Where he explored present-day Arizona, New Mexico, into the Panhandle of Texas, Oklahoma, and then Kansas. Again, you can pause the video if you need to write your notes down. Anyway, Francisco Vasquez de Coronado, he was born in Spain in 1510 in Salamanca, Spain. He came to New Spain in 1535, where he would get married. Of course, he would marry into a very wealthy family, and so he inherited a large portion of a Mexican encomienda estate. Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca. So this gentleman right here is what inspired Francisco Coronado to go on his own expedition. So this guy right here was a Spanish explorer. He actually took part in the Panfilo de Narvaez expedition that occurred in 1526, where they actually started off in Florida. And they got lost, and many of them died, and it was just him and another African slave who survived and made it back to Mexico. And of course, he had all these stories. Of course, this story is actually depicted in the intro content page in the video. It kind of depicts this story. But anyway, his writings encouraged the Coronado expedition. And so, hearing the stories of the mythical 7 cities of Cibola, Coronado decided to invest all his fortune into this expedition. Again, they thought they were gonna go and they were gonna become rich, just like Cortez had done in 1521 when he conquered the Aztecs. So along with him were 300 Spanish and 800 to 1,000 natives, mostly Aztecs. Again, they reached Culiacan, and then they continued north. And so you guys will actually watch a documentary on Francisco de Coronado, and it will kind of summarize his expedition. But anyway, he finally reaches the first Pueblo tribe in New Mexico, the Zuni Pueblo, on July 7th, 1530. And the ancient city that they arrived to was called Hawiku. Not much left of this ancient city, just a little bit of ruins on the Zuni Pueblo. It's been abandoned for about 400 or 500 years. Again, here's a picture of Culica Zuni Pueblo. You can kind of see that is what it looked like, just from, them, just the agriculture, I meant archaeology. Just from the archaeology, they've been able to kind of know what some of these ancient communities used to look like. But again, it was one of the largest Zuni Pueblos, founded in the year 1400. It's located 12 miles southwest of what is today Zuni Pueblo. Again, the site was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1960. Anyway, so when Coronado actually arrives, um, the Zuni Pueblo is actually kind of having kind of like a fiesta, you know, they're having some ritual time, and so they're not welcoming anybody. And so, of course, they weren't happy, you know, when Coronado then, you know, tried to force themselves there. And so a battle occurs between the Zuni Pueblo and Coronado and his men. Of course, the Zuni didn't, you know, have the weapons, you know, that the Spanish had, and so they had to flee their community. And so the Spanish kind of took over the Pueblo. Captain Whiskers is what the Spanish called him. He was actually a member of the Pecos Pueblo. Again, this Pueblo was up there near Santa Fe. They actually have a lot of ruins up there still of their Pueblo. But anyway, another person was Don Pedro de Tovar, which was a Hopi Indian village. And well, actually, Don Pedro de Tovar was actually one of the uh, top guys with Coronado, and so Coronado sends him to Arizona, where he ends up finding the Hopi Indian village in northeast Arizona. And then they sends Garcia Lopez de Cardenas. He traveled as far as west as the Grand Canyon of the Colorado River. And then Hernando de Alvarado marched eastward past Okama and Tiguas Pueblos to Sikui, Sikui, which is Pecos Pueblo. Now, so they meet up with another Indian native. He was a Plains Indian named the Turk, and so he tells Coronado of this great riches in this place called Kia Vera, and supposedly this is, you know, to the east. Now, just kind of fast forward a little bit. So when Coronado actually, you know, gets to Tiguis Pueblo, which actually the only thing that's left of that place is just a little bit of ruins. It's been abandoned for a long time. It's actually kind of close to Bernalillo, New Mexico. It's actually called the Coronado Ruins. But anyway, there was actually a battle that was fought there. Of course, you know, the Tigua Pueblos were peaceful. You know, they welcomed the Spanish, let them stay, you know, outside the Pueblo. But there were a few bad apples in the Coronado group who tried to violate some of the women and treat some of the Pueblos very bad, stealing their food and stuff like that. And so, you know, they decided to fight back. And so the Pueblos attacked the Coronado expedition, killing some of his members. And of course, Coronado, you know, fought back and ended up killing a lot of Pueblos during this battle. And so that's what they kind of glad that the Turk took Coronado east as far as Kansas. Of course, they didn't find anything, and they ended up realizing that the guy was the Turk, Plains Indian, was lying, and so they executed him, and then they returned back. But anyway, that is just a little bit of information on the Coronado expedition. So now we're going to talk about Juan de Oñate. So Juan de Oñate, he was born in 1550 in Zacatecas, Mexico, and he married Isabel de Tolosa Cortez Moctezuma. So she was the granddaughter of Cortez, who conquered the Aztecs, and the great granddaughter of Moctezuma, who was the last Aztec ruler. So he became a military leader, and on September 21st, 1595, he was awarded a contract to settle New Mexico. So this was the route that they took from Mexico City all the way into present-day northern New Mexico. It was actually an old Indian walking path. So, you know, it was how the Indians, the natives, would trade with each other, you know, because there's evidence that the Pueblos traded with the Aztecs, and the Aztecs traded with, you know, the natives that were in Central America and even into South America. So a lot of trade going on. There's even evidence of the Pueblos, you know, going to, you know, California and trading with the natives there, as well as going into the plains. So there was a lot of trading going around between the natives that created a lot of these paths that the Spanish would later use. Now, I don't like to call them the first Spanish settlers of New Mexico, because the group weren't, I wouldn't say they were pure Spanish blood, because a lot of them were mestizo, which means that they were the children or grandchildren of indigenous Mexicans. Of course, there were some full-blood indigenous that also made the trip with the group. But anyway, the trail spanned 1,400 miles from San Juan Pueblo in New Mexico to Mexico City. It took 6 months to get from Mexico City to San Juan Pueblo. Anyway, he left Zacatecas in 1598. He had 400 men. 130 of them would bring families. So kind of think about that. How many of them were single? And think about when they get to New Mexico, who they would make their wives. Kind of the same thing when the conquistadors came from Spain and conquered the Aztecs. You know, they came single, and so of course they made, you know, their wives were, you know, natives, and so, you know, their offspring were mixed, you know, mestizo. So the same thing would happen in New Mexico. So New Mexico's are kind of unique, because not only do we have Spanish ancestry, we also have, you know, Mexican indigenous, so Aztec, as well as Pueblo, Apache, Navajo, and all that type of stuff. So, you know, I'm actually a descendant on my father's side, my dad's paternal lineage. So my ancestors made this trip with Oñate back in 1598, and then also some of my ancestry is Pueblo. Anyway, Oñate made a formal declaration of Spanish possession of New Mexico on April 30th, 1598. He made contact with the first of many Pueblo villages in the northern Rio Grande Valley. So again, there's all these villages, Pueblo villages, just along the river, and so they went to each, you know, village. In July of 1598, they decided to establish headquarters at San Juan Pueblo. Again, it wasn't, you know, theirs. You know, there were people living there already. So pretty much when they got there, they actually made all the Pueblos move out of their place, and they moved in. You know, not only that, is they went and took all their food. You know, something about the Pueblos is they would store their food, and guess who ends up taking over that? You know, the settlers. So again, Oñate would then later go and explore the surrounding areas. You know, one of the big things that Oñate was able to get a lot of people on this trip was promising them of, wow, you're going to find gold, we're going to find gold, we're going to become very rich. And it just didn't turn out that way. You know, by 1600, a lot of the original settlers had left. You know, a lot of them did not like Oñate. They didn't like how he treated them, and he also didn't like how he treated the natives. So Santa Fe So the area of Santa Fe was actually originally occupied by the Pueblo people since 900 AD. But the capital uh, wouldn't be established until Don Pedro de Peralta becomes governor. So um, Juan de Oñate is kind of, we'll talk about it in the next slide. What Juan de Oñate did that kind of made him well, pretty much get fired. He was fired as governor, pretty much, and then he was charged with uh, of mistreating not only the settlers but also the natives. Anyway, he designated Santa Fe as the capital of New Mexico in 1610. And just a cool fact is Santa Fe is the oldest capital city in the United States. One of the oldest towns. I don't know if you guys have ever been to the downtown Santa Fe where they have the Palace of the Governors. That was built in about 1615, 1620. So that building's been around for a very long time. Anyway, Acoma massacre. So in 1598, Juan de Zalavar and his soldiers stopped at Acoma for provisions. The Acamas accused one of Zalavar's soldiers of stealing and violating a Acoma woman. And so this village that this occurred at actually still exists today. It's called Sky City. So if you ever want to see what it looks like, it's very cool how they built this town, this village, on top of a mesa. It was built around 1000 BC. I mean, 80. So about over 1,000 years ago, and people have been living there ever since, and it still exists. Crazy, it doesn't have electricity or running water, but people still live up there. Even an old Spanish mission up there still. But anyway, Acoma proceeded to kill Zalavar and nearly a dozen of his men. Supposedly, Zalavar was a nephew of Oñate. So, of course, Oñate would retaliate, and it resulted in a 3-day battle that left hundreds of Acoma men dead. And so he wanted to punish the survivors. He didn't care if they were women, children. So he would punish them. Men over 20 years of age would have 1 foot cut off, and then they were given 20 years of personal servitude. The young men between 12 and 25 received 20 years of personal servitude. Young women were given 20 years of servitude. 60 young girls were sent to Mexico City to serve in the converts there, never to see their homeland again. So you kind of see it was very harsh punishments. One thing you got to know is there wasn't really slavery in New Mexico, but they did use the natives as servants. And so whenever they ended their servitude, the years of servitude that they had to do, they just kind of joined the Spanish society. They married other Spaniards or other mestizos, or they married other servitudes, other servants. So I was looking at the 1790 New Mexico census, and they were all living among each other, in Spanish society. They were full-blooded Spaniards, mestizos, full-blooded indigenous, pueblos, living just like Spaniards, And of course, you still had your pueblos who were, still, were living in their villages. Anyway, that was that. So that we're gonna go ahead and go to the Pueblo revolt. Now, just so you know that Juan de Oñate mistreated his settlers and the natives, and so Spain got word of it, and so they recalled him, pretty much fired him. They put him on trial. He was found guilty. Pretty much died a loser. He ended up living the rest of his life in Spain. where he would later die. But anyway, the Pueblo Revolt would happen about 80 years later. So some of the causes of the Pueblo Revolt, again, number one was the decline of the Pueblo people. If you see in 1600, there were 80,000 Pueblos compared to 700 Spanish. Of course, they don't really have many numbers in 1609, but by 1620, they're down to 17,000 Pueblos and then 800 Spaniards. 1638, the population of the Pueblos kind of went up a little bit. But if you look by 1680, about 17,000, 1400. So you kind of see a lot of Pueblos died between 1600 and 1680. And you can even see even after the Pueblo Revolt during the 1700s into the 1800s, the populations of the Pueblos went, down to 9,000. And of course, by 1842, it was up to 16,000, and today it's a lot more. But anyway, when Juan de Oñate arrived in New Mexico, there were 100 different Pueblo villages. 80% of the population was lost between 1600 and 1675. 45 Pueblo villages were left by 1675, and then, thinking about it today, there's only 21. So you kind of see a lot of the villages, disappeared. Of course, we have a lot of ruins all over the state. Some of the ruins even have old Spanish missions there, but they're all over the place. Dozens of sites where the Pueblos used to live. Anyway, policy of taxation or paying tribute. So they would seize the Pueblo storage of corn. The Spanish arrived. They were dependent on the Pueblos for food. By 1607 and 1608, the Pueblos were now coming to the Spanish for food. The Spanish took all the storage and storing it in the missions for redistribution. So the Spanish kind of just took over, Again, it was the Pueblos' food. They're the ones that grew it, and the Spanish just pretty much took it from them. Kind of control their lives, control where they lived. There was times where they actually resettled the Pueblos. That's, the first settlers, present day Juarez, were actually Manso Pueblos, whose ancestral homelands were near the Rio Grande in present day Las Cruces. And so the Spanish resettled them in El Paso del Norte, which is, Juarez today, so that they can convert them to Christianity. And so that was about, by 1670. Again, one of the big goals was to convert the Pueblos to be Christians. They didn't respect the Pueblos. They didn't respect the religion. They prevented them from practicing. They wanted them to, not only speak Spanish, they wanted them to, be Catholics. So they burned their kivas, banned their traditional dances. They burned all the Conchina masks and the Conchina dolls. That's very important, to Pueblo beliefs. Some of which we would call them medicine men, back then they called them witches or sorcerers. But anyway, the Spanish would round them up and, put them in jail and, sometimes execute them. So an incident happened in 1675. They rounded up 47 of these accused medicine men. And they, again, right there in downtown Santa Fe in the plaza, they publicly whipped them, imprisoned most of them, and sent others into slavery in the silver mines of northern Mexico. They even executed 4 of them by hanging them in the plazas of 4 different pueblos in the north and south of the Rio Grande. So this incident is what really just, you know, the Pueblos were just done with it. You know, they knew they needed to do something. This was one of those medicine men, Pope. He was from San Juan Pueblo. And so after he got released from jail, the ones that, survived and weren't sent into slavery or executed, they just went to Taos Pueblo. And they went into a retreat in one of the kivas there. And so they were trying to see, ask their spirits what they needed to do. And so they were pretty much told that they needed to renew health for their people, and if they did that, the crops would reappear. But in order to bring this, they had to purge their world of the Spaniards. So the planning of the Pueblo revolt, again, Pope begins to coordinate this revolt by first getting all the villages on board. And of course, they didn't have calendars or anything, so they were able to keep a countdown. So each pueblo had a device, tying knots in a cord with the same instructions. They were supposed to untie one knot each day. And then on the morning that the last knot is loosed, everybody's to rise up and attack the Spanish. So they would send runners out to all the different Pueblo villages, kind of just keeping everyone updated. 2 days before the revolt, 2 of the runners were caught. And so they found out, the settlers found out what was going to go down. And so the Pueblos coordinated enough that they also get a second word out. So they send more, overnight they send runners out to let them know, hey, we're going to do this today or tomorrow. And so the Pueblo revolt actually occurs on August 10th, 1680. Anyway, the Pueblos would kill 401 Spanish settlers. They killed 22 Franciscan priests. There were thousands of survivors. 1,000 survivors actually were holed up in the governor's palace in Santa Fe for 9 days. Interesting that the Spanish, the Pueblos would just let them go. They would leave after that 9th day and move down the Rio Grande, and they would flee to El Paso del Norte, which they would establish the town then. So that's how we have Juarez, Mexico today. It was also settled by the first settlers of New Mexico from Mexico City, but who also settled with them were their Pueblo allies, Ysleta, and of course Fierro. Now the Fierro, their ancestral homeland was actually Socorro. They were actually one of the peaceful Pueblos, very friendly to the Spanish, and they called them Socorro. And so that's how we have a Socorro, New Mexico, and then a Socorro, Texas. But anyway, of course, we have a Ysleta in Albuquerque, Ysleta in El Paso. Same people, just some were allied with the Spanish and some weren't. Of course, if you look at this picture, this is actually my 10th great-grandmother who was killed. She was killed during the revolt. I found at least 3 of my direct ancestors who were killed. I also had some that weren't and were allowed to leave and flee because they were mestizo, meaning that they had Pueblo ancestry. So they didn't really kill, like if they knew that you were, your mother was a Pueblo, they did not kill you. So, but anyway, that is the Spanish period. So again, when you guys are finished with your notes, go ahead and upload them. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and send me a email. We could also discuss it during our Zoom meeting. All right, peace out.